Oh dear, shady fox, and food fight. Hello everybody, welcome back to Pinetree Wood. I'm actually over at my railway garden feature at the moment, but this video is about what's in the wood in June. June was a quieter month in the wood, not so many captures, particularly night time. There were more sort of magpies and pigeons during the day, but generally it was a lot quieter. So this is the compilation for June. June began with a visit by Tuxedo the cat. I'm still not 100% sure whether these are rabbits or hares. I've tried image searches from the video and get varying answers. The jackdaws are still regular visitors. Cherry the hedgehog showed up just before 1 AM on the 3rd, and the jackdaws were back at dawn. On the 4th, I spotted a couple of goldfinch on the sunroom patio cornflowers. They were pecking at the flowers, I presume to get at the seeds. A young rabbit was in the wood that evening, spending some time on camera. Later in the evening, Cherry the hedgehog was back again. Just after midnight, Smudge the fox passed down the edge of the wood, skirting along the lawn. Between 2 and 3 AM, Cherry the hedgehog made another appearance, passing by the pond and heading down the wood. Just before 3 AM, Tuxedo the cat headed up the wood. He stopped briefly before continuing towards the front of the house. He was back again a few minutes later. By dawn, the jackdaw and pigeon were in the wood. I'd just finished downloading the Trailcam when I spotted a blackbird and caught it on my phone. Thinking it may go into the pond, I moved up the wood so I was less visible, but the blackbird left, heading out under the juniper. The tailless magpie was back at the pond on the evening of the 5th. Not long after the magpie, the chaffinch appeared a little further up the wood. In the early hours of June the 6th, D-Day, Smudge spent a little time sniffing around the pond, possibly smelling the scent of seed that had been left there. Holly the hog passed through around 40 minutes after the fox. The blackbird came to the pond at dawn and took a dip, hanging around for a couple of minutes. The jackdaw was searching for seed early that evening. Around 20 minutes later, there were a couple of pigeons passing through, plus a rare robin visit. Robins have been noticeable by their absence since April. The robin came back to the pond shortly after. The young rabbit was hopping around the base of the thorny olive tree while a jackdaw was on the bird table. At 10 p.m. I was very surprised to see another visit by the deer. I'm guessing it was the same one as in late May. That evening, Tuxedo the cat came through the wood. Cherry the hedgehog followed around half an hour later. By dawn, the jackdaw was back, but the day was quiet after that. That evening, there was another visit by the robin. He was just about to go into the pond when two pigeons scared him away. The pigeons didn't stay long after that, and the robin returned. That evening, Latte the cat came through the wood. Latte hasn't been seen as often as earlier in the year. A couple of hours later, Smudge the fox made another brief appearance. Daytime during the 8th was quiet, but Cherry the hog turned up late in the day. An hour later, the young rabbit was out, unusually late. The 9th brought another first on camera, with a visit by this thrush. I haven't seen one in the garden over the past 5 years. It spent some time at the pond. A very wet-looking smudge was seen just before midnight on the 9th. The 10th was quiet until 3 pigeons visited that evening. They were chased away by the young rabbit. Around 10 minutes later, I spotted the rabbit on the lawn and grabbed some DSLR pictures. Late evening, Holly the hedgehog came to the pond for a drink. In the early hours of the 11th, Cherry, the other hog, was caught heading up the wood. The young rabbit was back again just before 3 a.m, another late visit. The rabbit was back in the wood again on the evening of the 11th. Shady, the new young fox, made a brief appearance at the end of the 11th. Tuxedo was back on patrol on the night of the 12th. The young rabbit was back playing in the wood at dawn on the 12th. Latte made a brief visit at 1:30 on the 13th, with Tuxedo a couple of hours later. The rabbit was back again at dawn on the 14th, seeming to be spending a lot of time in the wood. A single pigeon was the only daytime capture. Tips the cat passed down the wood just before 11 p.m, with Latte heading the other way at 2:30 on the 15th. The bullfinch arrived around 5:30, landing just beyond the thorny olive tree. Being some distance from the camera, the video is cropped to a third of the original capture. Two pigeons were joined by a blackbird just after 7 a.m. Nothing else was captured until the camera switched back on that afternoon, with the two pigeons back again. Shady the fox was the last visitor for the 15th, stopping briefly before continuing up the wood. Another fox, possibly Smudge, was seen at 2 a.m, carrying a dead bird up the wood. A female blackbird came for a dip at the pond at dawn, spending a full minute of the capture in the water. About 20 minutes later, a jackdaw spent some time searching for seed. Just before midnight on the 16th, Cherry the hedgehog was seen searching the woodland floor. Smudge was sniffing around the wood at 1:38 on the 17th. The birdseed on the table appears to be a strong scent for a fox. The jackdaws were back at dawn, with the young rabbit making a brief appearance 45 minutes later. A magpie and pigeon were the only late afternoon captures. Just before midnight, Cherry was back at the seed pile by the pond and was the only nighttime capture. The magpies were out at dawn on the 18th, with two of the family of four on the bird table, joined later by a third. All four were together a little later. I'm guessing the wing flapping and squawking is the youngsters. Half an hour after the magpies, and the young rabbit was back, followed by the magpies again. There was a rare sighting of a dunnock just before 8 a.m, plus a great tit. They seem to have mostly disappeared since spring. I see them occasionally now, but not often. That evening there was a jackdaw on the bird table, and nothing until Smudge at 2 a.m. the following morning. At 4 a.m. on the 19th, Shady was seen in colour heading up the wood. Around 90 minutes later, a pigeon and dove were in the wood. That evening, Tips the cat was back again, followed by Latte at 1:30 on the morning of the 20th. Just before 7 a.m, the young rabbit headed down the wood. I really need a name for it. At 7:30, while a magpie was drinking at the pond, a chaffinch made a brief visit. Another 15 minutes later, and the rabbit was back, along with a female blackbird that was fighting a berry. Cherry was searching for seed at 3:20 on the 21st, but there wasn't much left. A few minutes later, Shady headed up the wood. A jackdaw and a young rabbit were around at dawn. By 7 a.m, there was a dove at the bird table. Half an hour later, the magpie family had arrived. They were joined by a jackdaw, and this caused some disagreements over access to the bird table. Cherry was at the pond late on the 21st. Holly the hog hasn't been around much. The 22nd was quiet until the magpie family arrived at 7 p.m, with the rabbit spotted half an hour later. Tuxedo almost sat down just before 3 a.m. on the 23rd, but changed his mind. The jackdaws began the daylight action at 6:35, but the day was quiet after that. That evening, it was only the blackbird in the wood. Smudge was around after midnight, checking at a scent, and left heading out towards the lawn. The young rabbit was the only dawn visitor. That evening, the jackdaw and dunnock were around the pond. An hour later, a dove was making a big flap over landing at the bird table. This was followed by the rabbit again, being the last daylight capture of the day. At 10:30, Smudge made a brief appearance, heading out across the lawn again. 30 minutes later, Tuxedo passed down the wood. By dawn on the 25th, the young rabbit had the zoomies. A magpie arrived and then joined in the fun. I'm not sure who was toying with who. After all the fun and games, the magpie went for a dip in the pond, followed by the pigeon coming for a drink. In the early hours of the 26th, Shady the fox was sniffing around the wood again. Everything went quiet until 24 hours later, with Holly the hedgehog making an appearance. By early morning, the jackdaws had come to clear up the leftover seed. The dove was back that evening, struggling with the bird table that I was trying to keep just for the small birds. Cherry the hog was out late evening on the 28th. I spotted the rabbit on the lawn during the 29th and caught a few DSLR photos. Cherry was back on the 29th, but there was little other activity. Holly the hog was seen in the early hours of the 30th, taking a drink at the pond. Tuxedo passed through about 90 minutes later. The magpies were there on the evening of the 30th, eating some seed and bananas. Heading towards 11 p.m, both Cherry and Holly showed up in a rare joint appearance, ending the June captures. Thanks for watching. Do consider giving me a like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time. Bye.